Women are bridging the gender gap on multiple fronts. In politics, the boardroom, sports, etc. But nowhere have our gains over the past 40 years been more pronounced than in the number of women incarcerated in our nation's prisons. We've come a long way, baby. Sometimes the criminal justice system
It was more like guilty until proven innocent.
isn't all that just. Which stage of sleepwalking involves murder? That's scary.
Of course it is.
You don't give up, do you?
I'm Jena Friedman, and this is Indefensible. Since 1980, the rate of women incarcerated in the U.S. has grown twice as fast as that of men. Today's story is about a particular subset of incarcerated women, those who fight back against their abusers. Monday, January 31st, 1983. Police respond to a call at the Astro Motel, where cleaning staff has found the lifeless body of Robert Clubine, who appears to have taken a blow to the head. Authorities contact his estranged wife, Brenda Clubine, to make a death notification. They ask if she knows anything about Robert's whereabouts the night of his death. She says she doesn't, that she was playing cards with a friend. But her alibi soon falls apart, and police bring Brenda down to the station for questioning.
I've watched enough Adam 12 to know if you're fingerprinting me like this, you're arresting me.
And Adam 12 is a TV show?
Yeah.
Brenda admits that she was, in fact, with Robert on the night of his death.
He called me because I was filing for a divorce. He said, I'm gonna sign the divorce papers. Will you go to dinner with me? I said, in a public place.
According to Brenda, after dinner, Robert convinces her to come back to his motel room, where he then proceeds to threaten her.
He said, I want your wedding rings.
Why?
Because tomorrow when they find your body, they won't be able to identify it as long as you don't have your rings on.
He said that to you?
Yeah.
And then what do you do?
And I grabbed the wine bottle before he could, and I hit him in the head with it. And I took off down the street.
Wow.
He wasn't dead when I left him.
Police wonder, how does a 90-pound woman accidentally kill a man twice her size with a wine bottle? An autopsy gives them their answer. Robert Clubine's cause of death was a blow to the head, but the force of Brenda's strike may not have killed another man. At only 3 millimeters, Robert's skull was nearly half as thick as that of the average adult male. All of this seems to suggest Robert's death was accidental. Nevertheless, authorities charge Brenda with murder. Facing the possibility of life in prison, Brenda is offered a plea deal that reduces her sentence to 8 years, but she turns it down.
I didn't murder anybody, and I just knew in my heart of hearts that they could never find me guilty after everything I'd been through. If I was a juror, I would say, oh, there's no way, I can't find her guilty.
Why was Brenda so convinced that a jury would exonerate her?
The last 6 months of our marriage, I had 42 police reports.
I'm sorry, 42 police reports?
Yeah. I would sustain severe injuries. A doctor said the only time I've ever seen a skull fracture like the one you just had, that you're here for now, because I was in ICU for weeks, are in dead boxers. There was no fair fight between Robert and I.
According to Brenda, she filed numerous restraining orders against her abusive husband before the night of his death. Her self-defense claim seems strong. To help make her case in court, Brenda's lawyers enlist an expert witness and psychotherapist who specializes in domestic violence, Alice LaViolette.
I met Brenda in 1984. She weighed about 89 pounds. She was so depressed and sort of the picture of despair.
And did you believe that Brenda was acting in self-defense?
Oh my God, yes. She was a battered woman.
Alice determines that Brenda has battered women syndrome, a relatively new diagnosis in 1984, which supports Brenda's claim that she feared for her life and acted in self-defense. But Brenda's defense never has Alice testify.
At that time, you know, domestic violence was a new field. I think they were worried about how is the judge going to respond to the defense. And you've got a jury that you're trying to explain something that had never been explained before. You have to be someone who the jury believes when you tell your story.
What are some tips?
Breathing is one of the best tips on a stand.
About smiling.
You have to be careful about smiling on the stand.
Okay.
You can show emotion on the stand. You can have tears.
Okay.
But you can't look manipulative with your
Like
tears.
Amber Heard.
Yes. If women have told their story often enough, they can be detached from it.
So you have to be able to tell your story, but not too much, so that you're not detached in a way that's believable, but not too believable, because then it'll seem insincere. And you've got to cry, but not too much, because then you could seem manipulative. And you got to breathe, but not too much, because then you can kind of seem like you're in a Lamaze class.
Yes.
Without an expert to give context to her actions, Brenda is left to speak for herself on the stand. She describes her history of abuse at the hands of her husband, but it doesn't seem to resonate with the judge or the jury. To them, that proved that it wasn't just self-defense.
Yeah, it was rage.
And women are not allowed to have rage.
No.
On December 26, 1984, Brenda Clubine is found guilty of second-degree murder and later sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Once in prison, she will come to realize that her case is not an outlier. If anything, it's far too common. In 1983, Brenda Clubine fights back against her abusive husband, killing him with a blow to the head from a wine bottle. She's found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. In 1985, she begins to serve her sentence at the California Institute for Women, where she discovers she's not alone.
I heard these girls talking about one was an abused woman and she killed her husband. I was like, I thought they were talking about my case.
But they weren't. Brenda finds out there are many, many women in prison for fighting back against their abusers. So many so that it inspires her to start a support group.
The first night was with 8 women. Then we went to 12 women. Next thing I know, we were at 72 members.
And these are all women in prison for murder?
All of them.
I have never been in trouble before. 27 to life for protecting myself. The laws don't make sense.
But that was the 80s. There's got to be more support within the legal system for women like Brenda today, right?
Since the 1980s, the number of life sentences for women has gone up dramatically, and the majority of women are incarcerated for murder in ways that implicate intimate partner violence.
Lee Goodmark, director of the Gender Violence Clinic at the University of Maryland, has seen how the system continues to prosecute victims of domestic violence who retaliate against their abusers.
The system doesn't see people who fight back as victims because they fail to meet the perfect victim narrative. Perfect victims are weak and meek and passive.
And maybe also already dead?
That's not untrue. Once somebody becomes a defendant in the criminal system, it's like a switch flips.
And when a defendant, who has also been abused by the person they retaliated against, is trying to prove they acted in self-defense, it can be all the more challenging.
Self-defense law has all kinds of problems for victims who fight back against their partners. If you're not in immediate or imminent danger, it's not self-defense.
But for many people in abusive relationships, the danger is ever present, and women are particularly vulnerable.
Women are often smaller than their abusers, and oftentimes they'll use weapons to defend themselves. So when you pick up a gun, and the judge says, well, you could have walked out the door. You could have just, held the gun, and I can't even hold a gun properly.
I think you're supposed to put one finger there or something.
Yeah.
Looks like I have carpal tunnel.
It's very hard for somebody who has not been a victim of violence to understand what it feels like in that moment to be confronted with someone who you genuinely believe is going to kill you.
And our collective lack of understanding of intimate partner violence, coupled with arcane self-defense laws, can lead to longer sentences for victims who fight back. In fact, the ACLU reports that women who kill their male partners end up with sentences almost 3 times longer than men who kill their female partners, possibly because of the way so many women in these situations defend themselves.
Using a weapon makes it look as though the force that's been used is disproportionate, and therefore it's not self-defense.
So victims of intimate partner violence almost need self-defense classes to learn how to defend themselves against their abusers in a way that seems reasonable.
Yeah, you would have to be trained.
Yeah, you go in from here, boom, like this.
Okay, what if someone attacks me who isn't wearing a diaper?
Then it's gonna be so painful.
Meet self-defense instructor Nelson Neo. Perhaps he can help victims who fight back get a lower sentence if they happen to kill their abuser.
So after he lets you go, you just bail as fast as you can.
What about when he gets out on parole?
Then you have to deal with him again.
Okay.
Put your hand in front of your chest, and then do chicken wing. Yeah.
Okay, so would that kill them?
No, that would get you...
Get me away from them. What if I'm living with my attacker? What if I share kids with my attacker? How do I get away from them then?
Yeah, you need strong support, like a good friend that will take you in. Yeah.
Do you provide that in your class too?
Unfortunately, no.
Well, that was a bust. So if self-defense moves won't ultimately help victims of intimate partner violence trying to escape their situation, maybe changing the laws will. In 1990, the Women in Brenda's Prison Group, Convicted Women Against Abuse, share their stories with state lawmakers in an attempt to change the laws.
I asked the women to write why this group is important to you, and I put booklets together. I sent one to every senator and every legislator in the state of California and every governor in the United States. And on January the 2nd of 1992, battered woman syndrome became law.
Because of advocacy from people like Brenda, the state of California passes a law that allows battered women syndrome to be introduced and weighed as evidence at trial. And in subsequent years, more legislative reforms have followed. In 2021, California passed the Justice for Survivors Act, a bill that asks courts to consider the context in which a crime occurred when prosecuting some survivors of abuse. The law has been championed by over 70 legal and advocacy groups, but not everyone is a fan.
Just because someone was a victim once doesn't mean that for the rest of their life, whatever they do now, it should be forgiven or should be punished to a lesser degree.
Can a defendant also be a victim?
If they're charged with something, they're a defendant.
Mike Hestron is the Riverside County District Attorney and Vice President of the California District Attorneys Association, an organization that has vocally opposed the Justice for Survivors Act. I wonder why.
It's vague. The judge would have to go through a whole series of findings to prove that they considered the trauma and that the circumstances still require something more than that.
This law, the Justice for Survivors Act, just gives more work to judges and prosecutors before sentencing someone who's a defendant.
It takes a common defense and forces a judge to consider it in the way that the defense attorney wants them to consider it.
It gives context to why someone might have acted the way they did.
That's certainly what a defense attorney would say.
When you said defense attorney and you pointed to me, I appreciate you not doing that because I am so not a defense attorney.
No, I wasn't meant,
I
I didn't
I'm
mean you.
teasing
Yeah, no, I just meant defense attorneys in general.
Is there a version of the Justice for Survivors Act that the prosecutors lobby would approve of?
The California District Attorneys Association?
Yeah.
I'm sure there is. We want to help victims of crime, but we're not going to agree and roll over on the wholesale rollback of accountability. And so it's been done with really ingenious ways like this, calling it the victims, whatever you called it.
Justice for Survivors
There you
Act.
go, Justice for Survivors Act.
I didn't make that up. That's
Of course
what
you
it's
didn't.
called.
I agree. That's what the California legislature does, and they're very good at that, but it's a marketing ploy, and it's really designed to lessen the accountability on offenders of all kinds.
What is the danger in giving someone who has a history of being traumatized and then committed a crime a more lenient sentence?
What's the danger? The danger, I think, is that we end up with people that need to be punished greater or greater punishment or getting a lesser punishment. One of the problems with AB 124 is that it allows people who don't deserve the leniency to game the system. And we have a lot of gaming the system.
Of course, there are people who game the system. But there are also people like Sarah Cruzen, a Riverside County resident who was kidnapped, raped, and trafficked at the age of 13 before being convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison for killing the guy who kidnapped, raped, and trafficked her. In 2013, partly because of the media attention surrounding her story, Sarah Cruzen's sentence was commuted and she was released after serving 19 years. In 2022, she was officially pardoned by Governor Gavin Newsom. And even though the Riverside DA's office initially sentenced her and oversaw her appeals, Hestron's office has so far failed to overturn her conviction. How do we treat people who are defendants with a little bit more empathy and understand the context of their situations without it being so vague that it's hard for you as prosecutors to do your job?
Well, I think your long preamble to this question takes a lot of liberties. I just don't know the particulars of what you're talking about. I can't do that based just upon your hypothetical.
Are you familiar with Sarah Cruzen?
I know the name, but I'm not familiar with the facts.
Okay, she was a victim of trafficking, and she had asked to have her conviction overturned by your office after she was already free, and I think your office didn't allow that or didn't want to overturn that. Can you explain why?
No, I'm not familiar with the facts of the Cruzen case.
Gavin Newsom had pardoned her,
Yes.
but she had asked your office afterwards to overturn the conviction, and the office wouldn't?
I don't know the facts of what our argument was in court.
Are you familiar with the case of Brenda Clubine?
No. If I heard the facts, I might, but the name's not ringing a bell.
Okay. I am also not great with names.
Okay.
I don't even remember the sound guy's name, and I feel like he can hear me when I say that. Oscar. What's your last name? Velasquez. Are you familiar with Oscar Velasquez?
So, no, he's your sound guy, apparently. So, what else do you want to ask me?
I just want women who are in prison for doing things that they felt they had to do to have more lenient sentences, you know? And I know that that's not your MO, but maybe next time, you know, when you're sentencing someone who killed her abuser to life in prison.
Somebody needs some help getting this. I'm not sure. I don't want to ruin your.
It's not mine. It's what's his name?
Yeah.
Oscar.
Yeah.
Partly because of opposition from groups like the California District Attorneys Association, in order for the Justice for Survivors Act to pass, it had to be amended to exclude violent crimes. And much of the legislation aimed at helping victims of abuse who kill their abusers still lacks the teeth to actually support them. So how can we help women like Brenda Clubine?
We need to be doing more to address the conditions that are triggering violence. So we have data that says that economics motivate violence. And when you alleviate people's economic stress, they are less likely to be violent.
Here's $50. Don't beat your wife today.
Not exactly. I would say, here's a living wage. Let's see if that alleviates some of the stress on your family.
Give a man a fish. Maybe he'll still beat the shit out of his wife. Teach a man to fish. Maybe a wave could come by. Maybe he falls off the boat, drowns. Wife and kids are safe.
I am in no way advocating for killing people who abuse their partners.
He fell. There's still a long way to go in making sure survivors of intimate partner violence who find themselves in the worst possible situations imaginable get the justice they truly deserve. In your mind, has California gotten better at dealing with victims of intimate partner violence?
I think it's well on its way to really pay attention to the true victims in an abusive situation.
It may take a few more decades for the laws to reflect the reality so many criminalized survivors face. But when it happens, and it will be all thanks to people like Brenda Clubine. So until then, I might as well get the most out of this hour self-defense class I already paid for.
Grab my hand, press it to your head. No. Oh!
Why are you laughing? That's my hair decoy. I wear it when I walk home alone at night.
Okay.